Welcome everyone to the Universal Learning Series radio show, where we discover the spiritual and scientific universe. I'm your host, Sandy Andrew. On this edition of the show, we will be discussing Nostradamus with Peter Lemesurier. Do you think of Nostradamus, the famous 16th century prophet of Provence, as some kind of astrologer or mystical clairvoyant? If so, then the revelations contained in the book Nostradamus Bibliomancer may come as a shock to you. Peter Lemesurier claims that Nostradamus was neither an astrologer or clairvoyant. Apparently, Nostradamus believed that history repeats itself, and as a result, he simply projected past events onto the future by using the process of bibliomancy, randomly selecting extracts of chosen books. Ian Wilson, the author of Nostradamus, the Man Behind the Prophecies, describes Peter Lemesurier as the modern languages expert. He is widely regarded as Britain's leading authority on Nostradamus. Wouter Weyland from the International Nostradamus Research Group describes the book Nostradamus Bibliomancer by Peter Lemesurier as a radically new view on Nostradamus' prophecy making, supported by a biography putting things back into the right perspective, along with the most literal and up-to-date translation so far. The new book Nostradamus Bibliomancer comes with a CD that contains a number of Nostradamus' texts. Peter Lemesurier has appeared on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, the National Geographic Channel, and Britain's Channel 4. Please visit Peter's blog at 2012 NTOTW. That's right, funky name. The link is on the main page of the Universal Learning Series website and will be on the archived show as well. Now let's welcome Peter Lemesurier to the Universal Learning Series radio show.
Hello there.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon, United States time, and in the evening in the United Kingdom. Right, before we talk about your book and the prophecies and all these forecasts and things by Nostradamus, let's talk about the man prior to him doing all this work. Like, where was he born? What did he do up to a certain age before he engaged in all this work?
Right. Well, he was born in 1503, which is during the reign of Henry VIII of England, for example. Mm-hmm. And he went to university at Avignon, famous for its bridge, but he had to leave before he'd got his first degree because there was a plague outbreak and the university had to close. Mm-hmm. So he then became an apothecary, which is basically a sort of traveling chemist, even drug peddler, if you like, though not noxious drugs, and made his living out of that for quite a few years before he decided he wanted to become a doctor. So he joined the medical faculty at Montpellier, but got kicked out because he didn't have his first degree. He was just an apothecary, and apothecaries were regarded as manual workers, a bit like surgeons. I mean, the surgeon was the local barber, and the medicines were supplied by the apothecary, who was just a sort of chemist. In fact, they were regarded as grocers at the time.
Really?
And then after a few years of this, he started to get in on the annual almanac business, which where people brought out prophecies for each year. They were sold on the streets, and he was, I believe, the first person actually to make his name out of writing them. And eventually, he thought he'd better collect a few in verse to predict the future history of the world, which is what he's famous for, the book called The Prophecies. But he kept producing the almanacs right to the end of his life. In fact, the last one appeared in 1567, the year after he died.
I see. So he went from being a chemist, supplier, whatever, trying to be a doctor, and then he started making a living out of doing prophecy work, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, up until recently, or rather, for example, when I was growing up, this guy was hailed or portrayed as a clairvoyant. He could see amazing things. Hitler, the Antichrist, all this stuff. And now, recently, you have all this research that's been done that's saying, oh, well, maybe not. And your book kind of points to that direction of, look, there may be nothing special about this man, and that in that he may have simply looked at history and just forecast and guessed what may happen in the short term and the long future. Is that what your book's about, Peter?
Yeah, that's more or less it. This was very much the fashion at the time. People didn't really believe in the future because the world was going to end pretty soon. I don't think Nostradamus believed in the future, to be honest. What he believed in was a repetition of the past. It went right back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Plutarch said that history is the result of human beings, and human beings don't change, therefore history doesn't change. So he wrote a book called Parallel Lives, showing how certain ancient people had been more or less repeated, so to speak, more recently. For example, Julius Caesar he described as a new Alexander the Great. And you can go on like that. There's a whole lot of references to ancient figures, such as Hannibal, for example, in Nostradamus. Well, he wasn't saying Hannibal was in the future because he knew he was in the past. But what he was suggesting was that there would be a new Hannibal, or there would be a new Julius Caesar, or whatever. And as far as Hitler's concerned, you can forget that completely, because the name that people often interpret as being Hitler is, in fact, Histo, which was the ancient Greek name for the lower Danube River. And very often when he mentions that name, he mentions Rhin, R-I-N, with it, which was, of course, the Rhine. And the Danube and the Rhine were the northeastern border of the Roman Empire. And all the time he's borrowing stuff from classical times, and especially Roman times. Huh.
What do you know, huh? Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Okay, so how much money did this guy make during his lifetime here on Earth?
He made a huge amount, more out of his almanacs, I believe, than out of his prophecies. I think it's something like $300,000 by the time he died. But there were sort of bestsellers. Say every November there were fairs all over Europe, including the Frankfurt Fair, nowadays the Frankfurt Book Fair, and they were sold on the streets, and people picked them up. It didn't matter if they were wrong, and they nearly always were, because what do you do when this year's almanac turns out to be wrong? Well, you still buy next year's just in case, don't you?
Yeah, there's always hope. Now, describe for the listeners here today, Peter, what an almanac is, and then give us an example of what Nostradamus would write in one of his almanacs.
Well, the almanacs were, in the first place, calendars. Mm-hmm. But then all sorts of other things, the sort of weather you were likely to get, the diseases that were likely to be around, whether a lot of people were going to die, whether there was going to be war, that sort of thing. And people at the time complained, why doesn't it just stick to foretelling the weather, because it was the only way that people had of predicting the weather at the time. Why doesn't it stick to that instead of telling us when to change our shirts and that sort of thing? And so it was full of things like saying there will be peace and not peace, and it's a fairly safe bet. And dreadful things will happen, will infallibly happen, and I pray that they won't. And one of the contemporary critics said, well, if you say it's going to happen infallibly, no use praying that it won't. And he really stuck his nose in it on a couple of occasions there, where he said dreadful things are going to happen to the king or the royal family, so dreadful that I dare not describe them. And that was, of course, it nearly blew up in his face. He was summoned to Paris to explain it, and he was expecting to have his head cut off when he got there, but not so, because the queen who summoned him there was so keen on magic and the occult that she wanted him for a tame menagerie of magicians. But